I'd like to introduce Susan Orgill, who is presenting today's webinar, 5 Things You Must Know About Soil Carbon Now. So Dr. Susan Orgill is the Soil Carbon Program Manager and Senior Scientific Advisor at Select Carbon and was formerly with New South Wales DPI from 2005 to 2022. She is an applied soil scientist with over 15 years of experience in soil carbon research and development. She's very well known for her research with New South Wales DPI on soil carbon across landscapes from the Monaro in New South Wales to the Western Division of New South Wales, and for her outstanding ability to communicate with landholders and scientists alike. Susan is passionate about farm-ready research and evidence-based decisions, and she continues to work closely with producers to identify creative and reliable solutions to increase farm and landscape productivity, soil carbon and farming system resilience. And I'd just like to add, Susan, on a more personal note, we know the importance of commercial advisors to soil management in Australia is ever more important in this present day and age. And I commend Susan's and other scientists like Suze, other soil scientists, I commend your commitment, Suze, to ongoing scientific training and backup to advisors, which I know they very much appreciate.
Thank you very much, Luke, for that very kind and generous introduction. So this afternoon, I will be talking with you about what a registered soil carbon project actually involves, what the soil carbon science tells us, and importantly, what we're still unsure about in this space, and what you need for a well-designed strategy and informed expectations to increase soil carbon if you've got a registered project or not. So first of all, let me start by saying that the views that I share today are from an applied soil scientist point of view. It's not going to be a sales pitch. And I recognise that there's a range of different experience levels joining in the webinar today, from farmers to advisors to researchers to policymakers. So that's why we're going to go on a bit of a journey and learn more about the method to begin with, and then have a chat about the science and what we're seeing in conversations and in the media at the moment in the space of soil carbon. So soil carbon research is an increasingly important and exciting space. It's being brought to the dinner table, well, at least in the Orgill household for many years, but in dinner tables around farming communities as well. There will be 5 things that I will talk about that I think you must know about soil carbon that will be listed at the end of this webinar, but hopefully you'll pick up a couple more during the talk. Let's start by thinking about some of the givens. So some of the givens when we're talking about soil organic carbon, and what I mean by this is the things that we don't argue about. So increasing soil organic matter is absolutely good for soil health. For centuries, the importance of organic matter for productivity have been well known, and over the past handful of decades, there's been a lot of literature and well-documented evidence around the importance of soil organic matter for plant nutrition, for enhancing soil structure, and in a range of ecosystem services. It's also well documented that our historic agricultural practices have resulted in a decline in soil organic matter levels, but reassuringly, there's also been progress to turn some of this around with the adoption of conservation agriculture. And that shouldn't be overlooked when we think about the rundown period, but also the build-up period of soil organic carbon. Another really important factor that we know is well embedded in the literature is the importance of ground cover for increasing and protecting soil organic matter. Perhaps more recently, the role of soil carbon sequestration in mitigating climate change has been more recognised and come somewhat more of a topical conversation. So this is where this role is what we talk about today. So what does a registered soil carbon project actually involve? So the carbon market in Australia is legislated. It's underpinned by the Carbon Credits Act of 2011, which is administered by the Clean Energy Regulator. Now, an ACCU, an Australian Carbon Credit Unit, is a carbon credit unit which represents 1 tonne of carbon dioxide that has been removed from the atmosphere. So it's regulated and issued by the Australian government. 1 tonne of soil organic carbon is equivalent to 3.67 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents, or 3.67 ACCUs. When we're thinking about the role of science in underpinning the method, The Emissions Reduction Assurance Committee, or the ERAC, reviews methodologies and makes recommendations to the Minister regarding compliance with the offset integrity standards. So that means that for a method to be approved, it needs to be measurable, verifiable, conservative, there needs to be clear and convincing evidence, and it needs to account for material emissions due to the project. So there's science underpinning the carbon method that we use. In fact, in Australia, we've had a soil carbon method since 2014, and it's undergone a range of revisions. So 2014 was the grazing method, then there was a 2015 method, then there was a 2018 method, and the method that is used now in industry is the 2021 method. Underneath this method, it will outline all of the requirements to participate in carbon farming using the soil carbon method. So it will talk about their eligibility requirements, what the approved practices are. It provides guidance on the sampling and outlines what soil analysis is required. It gives very detailed calculations around how to baseline a soil carbon project. And there's a couple of different options for a measurement-only approach or a hybrid approach, where it's a model-assisted approach to reporting change in soil carbon stocks. The method also outlines all of the compliance obligations, so the audit schedule, the records that are required, the monitoring that's required, and the reporting that's required. And it also outlines the permanence period. So most soil carbon projects are 25-year projects. While I've said that it's science-based, it absolutely is. It represents progress, not perfection, and that's really important to understand. So that the way that the method is written in the supplement, there can be revisions made. And it should be revised to make sure that we're always operating in the space of best and most recent science. So now let's briefly review some of the key components and steps in implementing the method. So when we're talking about project design, we start with what the project area is. Now, a project area can be all of or part of a farm, or it could even be multiple farms. So if we look at a project area, the coloured polygons that you can see within this area are what we refer to as the carbon estimation areas, or the CEAs. Now, carbon estimation areas are designed an estimation area. You need to have at least one eligible management activity, which is the EMA, applied. It needs to be new or materially different, and I'll speak about that again in just a moment. Within the carbon estimation area, we have at least 3 strata or zones, which are designed to statistically account for variability within the carbon estimation area. So done well, these can reduce the minimum detectable difference in soil organic carbon. So while the method outlines what the minimum requirements are, which is 3 zones or strata per carbon estimation area, designed well, there may be multiple more than that. The next step, once we have carbon estimation areas and the strata, is the sampling plan. Now, the sampling plan needs to be submitted to the Clean Energy Regulator prior to sampling, and this is really important for the integrity of the process. So the sampling plan needs to outline the randomisation approach that's being taken to decide where soil cores will be collected from, and that sampling plan, once approved by the Clean Energy Regulator, needs to be provided to an independent third-party soil sampler to undertake that sampling. So what the intention is to remove any potential bias or gaming from this process. The samples which are collected by the third-party soil sampler are sent to an accredited laboratory for analysis as it's described in the method. So using the dry combustion method with a range of soil preparations, which is outlined in those documents, which typical accredited laboratories will follow. Now, the remeasurement schedule can range between 1 or 10 years. For a measurement-only approach, it needs to be remeasured at least every 5 years. And then in that case, you report for ACCU issuance every 5 years or less than that. At this point, the land management strategy, which includes what the practice change is, can also be reviewed. Now, the samples must be collected to at least 30 centimetres and reported soil carbon stock changes to at least 30 centimetres, but you can also report soil carbon stocks in the 0 to 30 plus the 30 to say 100 centimetres or deeper than 30 centimetre soil layer also. So if we just take one more look at the image that we've got on the screen here, we can see we've got the project area outlined. We can see that the different colours represent the different carbon estimation areas. They don't need to be side by side. So you can see the green areas are quite dispersed, but they need to be within a certain spatial range of one another. And they would be grouped based on those landscape features and land use. The eligible management activities are an important part of the carbon project because this is the practice change which results in an increase in soil organic carbon. Now, all of the eligible management activities, there's 13 that are outlined in the method, are all identified from the literature where there has been an increase in soil organic carbon. Now, that doesn't mean that everything works everywhere all the time. You still need to understand the farming system, the soil type, the climate, and how that practice change can be incorporated into that farm business. I've grouped here the eligible management activities under 4 main headings. Now, these 4 main headings are around how you can increase organic matter to the soil, so drive increases in soil organic carbon, and also around protection of organic matter within the soil as well. The first one is around overcoming soil constraints. So applying nutrients to the land to overcome nutrient deficiencies, applying land to remediate acidic soils, or applying gypsum to remediate sodic or magnesic soils. The next one is around how we can use pastures and legumes in cropping systems as well as in grazing systems to increase organic matter supply, recognising the important role that nitrogen plays in these farming systems, but also in the process of building soil organic carbon. So this may be looking at a conversion from a cropping system to a permanent pasture. It could be looking at influencing the length or the frequency of the pasture rotation, or it might be looking at altering the stocking rate, duration, or intensity of grazing so that you can influence that photosynthetic capacity that the pasture is having, as well as the composition, so influencing the legume content of pastures, which is increasingly important. The next one is around protection. So reducing cultivation, enhancing soil cover, and stubble management. Also in this category, I've included the cover crop. So cover cropping to promote soil cover and improving soil health. The last one is around soil engineering and irrigation. So this is looking at landscape modifications such as water spreading, water ponding, clay delving as some examples, as well as management of irrigation. One of the rules in the method is that the eligible management activity needs to be new or materially different for that area. So it can't be business as usual. And so for some people, they might look at this list and say, do you know what, I'm already doing all of that. And straight away, that may mean that they are not eligible for a registered soil carbon project. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't continue to monitor soil health and soil carbon levels, and they shouldn't continue these practice changes. It may just mean that the eligibility based on the current management activities which are listed in the method may mean that it might be limited in their capacity. So it needs to be new or materially different. And this is where we have, it needs to be additional carbon that is being sequestered due to the soil carbon project. Now, if we think about bringing this all together in a project which generates ACCUs, Australian Carbon Credit Units, in an additional low risk and permanent way, you can see that it takes an experienced team and knowledge of your farming system to achieve this. So there's the project design and registration phase. As part of that registration document, there's the land management strategy. This outlines what the project area is, the carbon estimation areas. It identifies those eligible management activities. It explains how they are new or materially different, but really importantly, it needs to lean on literature to show how it's reasonably expected to increase soil carbon if you implement these. You also need to outline how you're going to mitigate any risks of soil carbon decline for the project and describe monitoring and record keeping. The land management strategy needs to be reviewed by a suitably qualified person, and it can be reviewed throughout the project as it should be, because as new science and new practices, new technology and new knowledge comes on board, we need to be refining what this land management strategy is. Soil Carbon Project is for 25 years, so it's around this continual improvement of building soil carbon over time. The method also outlines the offset report requirements and outlines that there needs to be at least 3 independent audits throughout that 25-year soil carbon project. So I've spoken around about what the method involves. An important part of that is how we calculate net carbon abatement. And I want to quickly touch on the importance of accounting for greenhouse gas emissions as well. So there is an increase in soil organic carbon, but we also need to think about what the increase in any project emissions may have been. The first graph that you can see here on the x-axis is 2 columns. We can see the baseline soil organic carbon stocks, and the second column is out at 5 years' time what the soil organic carbon stocks are when we remeasure. We can see that everything along the dashed line is the increase in soil organic carbon stocks. So that's what we are talking about in terms of what the project has delivered and an increase in carbon. But we need to think about net abatement. So we need to consider what the increase in or what the greenhouse gas emissions may have been from that project. So here we have a very similar graph, but this time we're looking at project emissions. We've got the baseline project emissions, which are documented for the 5 previous years before the project started. And then we have the project emissions for that same project area. Now, if those project emissions are greater than the baseline emissions, the difference needs to be taken off what that increase in soil organic carbon stocks has incurred. So if we have a look at this final graph here, which is looking at net abatement at year 5, you can see that the increase in soil organic carbon stocks is considered, less the increase in project emissions, which gives the net carbon abatement. So this is where it is trying to control for leakage or additional greenhouse gas emissions which may have occurred because of the project itself. There are other mandatory discounts which are included, and the first one of that is the 20% discount for a 25-year permanence period as opposed to a 100-year project. The second discount is the risk of reversal buffer, which is for fires, floods, droughts, pests and diseases. So there's that 5% discount there. And for all soil carbon projects, there's a 25% temporary discount at the first issuance as well. So now I want to talk about some common points of confusion, misconceptions and frustrations, and maybe it's the frustrations from my point of view as much as others. So the comment I hear a lot is we still don't know how to measure soil organic carbon. We absolutely do know how to measure soil organic carbon. It is agreed in the method that the approach is the dry combustion method, which sometimes on your agronomic soil test results will be listed according to the analytical instrument. So it might be listed as a LECO or a JUMAS. Absolutely, there are lots of different ways to measure soil organic carbon, to look at soil organic carbon fractions, which are becoming increasingly important. But what is agreed in the method is this approach, which looks at total organic carbon, which includes the charcoal fraction, the particulate organic matter, and the mineral associated organic matter as well. Why can't I get paid for carbon already in my soil? You can only get credits issued for registered projects and for increases above your baseline. So the practice change needs to be new or materially different. It needs to be above business as usual for your farm. So we cannot include business as usual activities. It needs to be additional carbon that is sequestered due to the soil carbon project. Soil carbon projects are a tool to mitigate against climate change, and it's really important that they're done well and with high integrity. People will just flog their country, run down their carbon, then get credits when they change practice. It is amazing how many times I get asked this or have this comment kind of thrown at me. This would take a lot of effort, hey? Like I know a lot of farmers and I don't know that people would actually do this, but let's say they did. It would take a lot of effort. It would be very time consuming and it would be an extremely costly way to get carbon credits. I think it's a low risk gaming strategy. You can increase soil carbon stocks by just compacting your soil. So this is where people are looking at the way that we calculate soil organic carbon stocks is we take the carbon concentration, we multiply that essentially by the depth over which that sample was collected, by the bulk density, which is the mass of soil for a given volume. So and that's so you can take a concentration and take it into a weight for a given area. Now there's a way in the method that kind of deals with this kind of gaming, and that's called calculating based on equivalent soil mass. So it accounts for soil mass change throughout time. And I guess just another point to highlight that compacting soil will not increase plant growth, and I think a lot of people understand that. So if it doesn't increase plant growth, it's certainly not going to increase soil organic carbon concentration. Sample the poor areas at baseline and the good areas when you're remeasuring. I've got there, just know, like the method requires random allocation of sampling points. You need to tell the report to the Clean Energy Regulator how that randomisation process and approach has occurred. You need to give them the sampling plan prior to handing it to the third party. The third party sampling provider needs to be financially independent of the project, and an accredited laboratory needs to analyse the samples. The method controls for any kind of frustrations or points of confusion according to this point. You can increase soil organic carbon infinitely. I just think it's not that simple at the moment, and I'm going to come back to this in a couple of slides' time. It is far more useful to think about potentially attainable soil organic carbon as defined by net primary productivity, so the photosynthetic capacity of plants using the amount of sunlight and water and nutrients that they have for a given area of land, and also strategies which can build microbial necromass or humus in the soil. So what soil carbon science tells us, and importantly what we're a little bit unsure about, we just run through some fundamentals. We know that soil organic carbon stocks are largely driven by soil type, climate and land use. We know that soils with a higher clay content can stabilise carbon through organomineral associations, so you can get organic carbon loading on the mineral surfaces, which helps with the stabilisation or slows the carbon down within the soil. We also know that subsoils are typically less saturated with carbon than surface soils. This is all documented in the literature. We appreciate that there's considerable spatial variability in soil, and it's really important to recognise that that spatial variability isn't just set throughout the soil profile. It varies depending on which soil layer you're looking at as you move down through the soil profile as well. We've known for decades that the protection of organic matter within aggregates is really important for building soil carbon. So there's fantastic work done in the 80s from Odes et al. Looking at the role of micro and macro aggregation for protecting and accumulating soil organic carbon. And we know the practices which can enhance this and facilitate this way of building soil carbon. In some cases, we know that increasing organic matter inputs to the soil also increases soil function, which is a good thing and is absolutely agronomically and ecologically desirable. And it increases soil function, but it doesn't always increase soil carbon stocks. And sometimes we can't always detect that change in soil carbon stocks as well. And the last 2 points are around understanding and managing carbon and nitrogen dynamics. So there is a link between carbon and nitrogen. Soil organic matter is 58% carbon, 42% other stuff. One of the biggest other stuff is nitrogen. It is really important in that stabilization process. And microbes need nutrients just like plants need nutrients. And when we look at the characteristics of the slow carbon pool, the mineral associated organic matter, we know that it's predominantly microbial necromass. So a couple of things, and I'm hoping that we've moved on past some of these comments, but I did hear it a couple of weeks ago again, that there's no evidence that you can increase soil organic carbon in Australian farming systems. Yes, there is, like 3 words. Yes, there absolutely is. That's 4 words. However, so it's in the literature. Here's one example of a table from a paper that we published a couple of years ago, but there's lots of literature around increases of soil organic carbon with improved agricultural management and practices. That is where those eligible management activities in the method come from and are based on. However, the carbon sequestration rate is going to depend on the initial, your starting soil organic carbon level. If it's lower to begin with, there's a bigger bucket to refill, so it can increase more rapidly and to a greater extent. It is influenced by climate, it's influenced by soil type, and it can also be influenced in how well the practice change is actually implemented as well. We know that these increases in soil organic carbon, they're not necessarily linear. Typically after practice change occurs, there will be a greater increase over the next 5 to 10 years, maybe push it out to 50 years, and then it starts to plateau off. It starts to plateau off as those soils reach their new equilibrium. Like soils are living systems. If you increase organic matter supply, You'll also increase soil function and microbial activity, and you will, while you'll build microbial necromass and you'll build soil carbon, it will start to plateau off, and you can think about then what is the next intervention to continually increase soil organic carbon. So the way that you should use scientific literature is to guide and sense check on the estimates of soil organic carbon change, just recognizing that there's some big other drivers there. It's not linear and it can plateau out. There's also a lot of evidence to show, and this should be no surprise, that not everything works everywhere all the time. So you need to have that skilled advice and critical mind when you're thinking about what to do, where, when, and how. The role of scientists is to question, theorize, and recommend based on literature and evidence. To say I was a bit disappointed hearing people say the quote that you can see on the screen now is probably an understatement, even more so because it hasn't been a one-off statement as well. If you're not scientifically trained, you still need to respect what science can give in terms of solutions and keeping things in check. We absolutely need science in this process. Science underpins the method, yes, but we also need to be ready to continually improve as best available science and new science comes online. So this is simply not true. Science does take time, and I get why people find that frustrating, but soil carbon projects are not designed to replace peer-reviewed scientific studies. Science needs to be seen as a compass here to say, are we going in the right direction? What is the evidence? What are the questions that need to be answered now? Scientific papers are about original results. They include critical evaluation. Scientific method is important to investigate observations and theories. So you can get carbon credits issued based on change in 2 points in time. You could not get that published in the scientific literature. That said, you get those credits issued in 2 points in time because the commitment in a soil carbon project is that it is maintained for a 25-year permanence period. There are monitoring checks, there are ongoing resamplings. The two are not directly comparable, a soil carbon project and a scientific study. Science needs to continue to inform the method and how the method is implemented, and science absolutely still plays a really important role in this space. And I think both industry and scientists need to be open to learn from one another. Reading beyond the headline and thinking critically and constructively, last week again, soil carbon hit the media with Raf's really great paper out of Curtin University. This is a brilliant read, it's very timely, and it shows that we need action now. And his paper, the modelling, is looking at that with current and increasing trends in greenhouse gas emissions and increasing temperature, that there will likely be a net decline in soil organic carbon in our agricultural soils this century. Basically, future climate means that we need more resilience in our agricultural systems. We need to focus on adoption of practices which lead to less loss. That's essentially what this paper is demonstrating, as well as an accumulation of soil organic carbon. And close to my heart was the fact that this paper also calls out that we need increasing attention and solutions for rangeland farming systems as well. When I saw this paper, it reminded me of this image that I hadn't looked at for a few years, but I dug it out again to include it here in this presentation. And it's from 2017 FAO publication. And if you look at the far left-hand side, it shows that in a healthy soil, we have carbon which is being drawn down into vegetation and soils. It's being cycled back into the atmosphere and it's in equilibrium. As we move across to the right-hand side of this diagram, we can see with temperature warming, you get these feedback loops and things start spiraling down and getting worse and worse. So as temperature warms and aridity increases, you get expansion of dryland conditions, you get soil degradation, you increase evapotranspiration, and with those processes, you get more carbon dioxide leaving the soil, which increases the temperature warming, which increases aridity. So this is what this paper is talking about, and it's about the implementable practices that we could put in place now to slow this down, and also identifying responsive parts in the landscape to continue to increase organic carbon. And just to show that this isn't just in the scientific literature, it's hitting the newspapers all the time, and very interesting. It seems like there's not a week goes by that I don't get text messages from someone about a news article or a paper that's come out, and this time it just happened to be from my mum, so I thought I'd include it as well. And funnily, the next message was about making sure I didn't make the kids walk home in the rain. So the cool stuff that we're still learning about, I'm going to call out 4 great papers that I've looked at recently or over the last kind of 6 to 12 months, which I think, yeah, this is going in the right direction. This is why we need to continually support scientists and scientific endeavours to make this better. First one is by Sinani. So it's a great paper, Sinani from CSIRO, presenting an approach to estimate soil organic carbon deficit, looking at the attainable carbon that we can sequester in soils in the fine fraction. It uses the SCARP data set, so looking at the 30 centimetres historic data set, a very useful approach. And it really looks at, I guess, where we can, the different scientific tools we can look to identify where carbon projects will work and how well they'll work as well. The next paper there is a paper out of Germany, which looks at the fact that there may be no upper limit to mineral associated organic carbon, which is a pretty exciting concept to debate in the scientific literature. So when we think about clays becoming loaded with organic carbon, this is looking at perhaps you can go beyond that and continually sequester carbon. Very similar to some work, I guess, that Clive Kirkby and John Kierkegaard looked at, looking at that stoichiometry and managing ratios in the more stable fractions of soil organic carbon. And the 2 on the far right-hand side, the top one is looking at some interesting work around accumulating carbon in the subsoil, remembering that the subsoils represent a great opportunity to sequester carbon, absolutely, and it's looking at the role of deep-rooted perennial plants and nitrogen. The 4th paper, the one below that, is also looking at the role of subsoil accumulation, but it's looking at carbon which might become more labile when you increase microbial activity in the subsoil. So it's a very exciting space at the moment. It's important to realise that the same processes don't occur uniformly throughout the profile. We need to understand the soil and plant interactions. We need practical and cost-effective solutions to discern the differences between climate and management impacts. But we also need to appreciate that management plays a really important role in realising a response to climate as well. And I've got their science is always a friend, and sometimes your friends don't always tell you what you want to hear, but you need to hear it. But you always need to come back to that kind of same reliable process as well. So a well-designed project, that's given you all of the background. For a well-designed soil organic carbon project, you first of all need to understand what the soil carbon potential is. So what is the soil's capacity to store additional carbon? This is going to be influenced by how much carbon is there now, by the amount of clay, and by the type of clay as well. So looking at that potential and attainable increase in soil organic carbon. Another important decision or component of this decision is looking at the system's capacity to increase carbon inputs. You need a stepwise change in organic matter supply of the soils to increase soil organic carbon. The third one is looking at the ability to protect and retain carbon, remembering that these projects are for 25 years. So we need to constantly be thinking about ground cover and soil structural enhancement so that we can continue to protect and retain carbon with all of the challenges that our future climate is going to throw at us. Projects should be integrated into the farm business. Land management strategies, so where you have your eligible management activities, your expected sequestration rates, as well as the risks, they need to be regionally specific. You actually need boots on the ground to look at the farming system, understand the farming business structure, as well as the soil type and the crop or pasture which is occurring there. It needs to be scientific and evidence-based. So coming back to that offsets integrity standards, it must be measurable, must be additional, and must be permanent. And this is what will underpin high integrity carbon credits. Sampling programs need to be designed to detect small increases in soil organic carbon that are due to the management change. So we use models for guidance. We make sure that we're realistic in our expectations and understand how vulnerable or labile some of the organic matter that's accumulating actually is. So don't compromise on quality, and you only consider projects that are productivity focused, science-based and data-driven, no matter what decision you're making. So the 5 things. Building soil organic carbon improves soil function. It's really important for productivity. No one argues about this. This is essentially what we need to be focusing on, whether or not we're considering a registered soil carbon project. Carbon is always cycling. It's influenced by the environment as well as management factors as well. So if we want to change how much carbon is in the soil and sequester more, we may need to change practice. When you change practice, the increase in soil organic carbon, and this is a quote from Mark Conyers, my PhD supervisor, it may be slow and unspectacular, and you need data to make sure you're going in the right direction. The method is absolutely science-based, and more importantly, or just as importantly, the need for new science and evidence is ongoing. Only registered soil carbon projects are issued carbon credits, and only for increases in soil organic carbon stock. So when there's carbon credits coming out of registered soil carbon projects, that means that they have met all of the requirements of the method. And lastly, registered soil carbon projects are a good fit for some farm businesses, but not all. Regardless, literature indicates that we need to take action now to continue to build soil organic carbon in our farming systems.